Hey everybody, Paintmarine here with another Paintmarine's bookshelf. Today I'm doing the short story that has caused quite a stir on the internet, which is The Consequences by Andy Clark that was just released a few days ago. And I'll have a link in the description below, so if you want to go to the Warhammer community page and check it out and read it yourself. It's like 2.5 pages, really quick read and very interesting, controversial, starting a lot of waves across everywhere. So if you haven't read it, I would definitely suggest stop real quick, go read it, and come back and definitely join in this discussion in this thoughts video. And yeah, there'll definitely be some spoilers. So again, if you haven't read it, just be aware of that. So Consequences starts out with apprehend these traitors. So we start off with the Custodes and Sisters of Silence, like retinue, escorting some gray shields to the Brazen Drakes to go and reinforce them. They've been chosen by Gilliman to go reinforce this chapter. Now this chapter, we have no idea who their successors of any kind. Brazen Drakes could suggest salamanders, although there is no record of salamanders getting successor chapters, at least definitely before the Ultima founding, especially because they were pretty much wiped out at Istvan and all that, so they didn't have the bodies to really go out and make successor chapters. So they did that Brazen Drakes, just because they have the word Drakes in there, doesn't necessarily mean that they're salamanders. We don't know who they are successors of, and I think that is something that's going to come into play here in a little bit. I think it's an important thing to point out for sure, is we need to really know who they're successors of. But yeah, so they show up at the world. It's Cassadur, and they find it war-torn and ravaged. But they don't really know the full story of what's going on. But because it appears as if the chapter of Space Marines there have somehow fallen to some kind of heresy or betrayal. Again, we don't know if they've fallen to chaos or they're renegades, or even if it's them at all. It could be an enemy trick. We don't know. And so much to the point that the captain of the Grey Shields, being sent Captain Girion, is trying to point that out to the Shield Captain Tyvar of the Custodes, that we don't know what's going on. So he actually says, Shield Captain, began Girion, and then his response is, "You do not address me, Girion," said Tyvar, his voice cold and hard as adamantine. "You do not look at me, nor at any of the faithful servants of the Emperor. You are tainted by heresy, and you will be detained along with all of your battle brothers until an appropriate fate can be determined." Again, he says, "Shield Captain, we do not know the chapter has truly turned," he said. "This may be a mistake or some machination of the enemy. I am not in the habit of betraying my battle brothers." Yeah, so right there we kind of see like the escalation now. He's basically pleading that to not lump them in with these other, I guess, traitors, because at the end of the day, he's like, we don't know. Are they traitors? What happened? But don't condemn us for the actions of a chapter we haven't even been to. And then the other thing too, so the story takes place from kind of like a narrative standpoint of Decima, who is a Sisters of Silence, who's on board. But the problem I have, she's just like a non-factor, and she just ends up kind of folding and going along with something she doesn't think is right either. To the point where she even says, "This is wrong," Decima thought, pushing down her extreme frustration and bitterness. "We set out with a purpose and a mission. We were to strengthen the Imperium's defenders against our foes. Instead, we find yet more corruption and betrayal. More supposed champions unworthy of the trust the Emperor has extended them." But yeah, so and this goes on throughout, where she constantly has like this confliction where she feels like she's wrong, but she just keeps going along with it with the Custodes. And I'm not really sure the point of that, like why is she so conflicted, but just is going along with it, other than I can only assume that she's just afraid, essentially. She's afraid that if she does go against the Shield Captain, she's just going to be struck down too. So she's like fearful and is worried about protecting her own life, which both of those thoughts and aspects kind of contradict or not something you think of when you're thinking like the Sisters of Silence and stuff like that. But I don't know. It's interesting though. And then we have one of the other Brazen Drake, or Gray Shields rather, says, "You give us no chance to speak in our defense," cried one of Gerion's brothers, no longer able to hold his silence. "These sins are not ours to account for. We have fought loyally and done no wrong. And now," and he's cut off, as gunshots ring across the bridge, the thunder in their silence like a hammer taken to a pane of glass. The Brazen Drake who had spoken was thrown flat on his back by a tight burst of mass reactive bolts. At such a close range, even power armor could not resist their fury. Blood sprayed Grey Shield's deck crew and consoles alike. So right there, not Tyrion, Tyvar takes him down. Yeah, and then again, it continues to escalate. Finally, as they're fighting, the Captain, Girion, and Tyvar, "Brothers, we are betrayed," he roared into his Gorgot's vox mic, throwing himself sideways as he reached for his own Drake embossed power sword. "Consider all outside our chapter hostile. Seize the fleet." So here we have the problem. Obviously, Tyvar kind of gave him a second chance. He told him, "Surrender yourselves, turn yourselves over, and then we will decide your fate at a later time." The captain, the Grey Shield captain, having a little more common sense than like Tyvar, and obviously being himself, like, one, of course he doesn't want to give up his weapons and be defenseless, and basically give himself up to who I'm sure he probably already thinks, he already thinks we're traitors. If we give up our weapons, we just have zero chance and we're going to be killed off, because he just thinks that we're all tainted no matter what, even though we have no connection to this chapter outside of our gene seed. And this is what I'm going to get to here in a little bit about the gene seed again. So I can see where like he's trying to like, hey, listen, let's figure out what's really happening. We don't know if they've truly turned or if it's a trick or what. So let's go check it out. I can see where Tyvar could see the issue being like, well, he doesn't want to do that, because if they go down to the planet with the Primaris, essentially one of three things could happen. They go down, they find out it was a trick, the chapter's still loyal, everything's good. They go down, they've turned in some way, and the Primaris are like, oh yeah, they are traitors, and then start blasting them away along with the Custodes. Okay, not great, because we have another traitor chapter, but everything's good. Everybody's blown away the heresies or the heretics. Then third is they get down there, Primaris see their brothers have turned, and then somehow find a greater loyalty to them and decide, you know what, I'm going to fight on their side against the Custodes. I don't know. In the Dark Imperium book, I can't remember the Marine's name. He is one that is a Grey Shield, wants to become an Ultramarine, but essentially he gets sent to reinforce the Nova Marines, and he feels all kinds of different ways about that. He's not a big fan of it. Of course, most of the Grey Shields, once they're dispatched to or disbanded, want to go to their actual parent chapter. So a lot of them kind of had a bit of disappointment when they get sent to successor chapters, and this was the case with this particular Nova Marine. So I find it hard that they would just get down there and outrightly side with the Brazen Drakes, who they have no connection with prior, and like I said, I don't really see any reason why they would get down there and suddenly be like, oh yeah, they're my brothers, because a lot of the times these other chapters weren't very accepting of, or the Primaris, when they showed up, felt out of place anyway, and like they didn't really belong. So I don't know. I don't really feel like that would happen, but I could see, from the narrow mind of the Custodes Shield captain, he would definitely be like, well, I don't want to take the risk, or, like it seems like he already had decided, it doesn't matter, you're all traitors. Traitor's a traitor. So he basically gives him a second chance, where he's like, I'm not in the habit of repeating myself or whatever, and still that doesn't happen. So that's where like the brother speaks out. He shoots him, and then it just goes from there, and it's all hell breaks loose. They start fighting, and the captain yells out that they've been betrayed. and to seize the fleet. Now at this point, they've definitely taken a hard stance and fallen into what the custodians would definitely say is heretical. But it was like their hand was forced. They felt like there was no other way to survive, because even still, if they would have laid down their weapons, they probably would have just been killed anyway. So it's kind of one of those things. It's like, rather be slaughtered as a warrior than slaughtered as a pig. I feel like is kind of what the position of the Gray Shield captain decided to take, essentially. And then even more so, he definitely throws it back at Tyvar, who is still completely just ignorant, doesn't care, got his narrow-minded. He's like, doesn't matter. I am the Emperor's representative. I speak for the Emperor directly, and you guys are nothing. So anything you say, it doesn't matter. You're always going to be at fault. So the captain says, you have torn this fleet in two, traitor, spat Girion at Tyvar, as the two warriors pressed against one another's blades. You have turned the Emperor's loyal servants and slain my brothers and forced my hand. He replies, the heretical gene seed within your bodies is its own condemnation, Tyvar replied. I am Custodes. I speak with the Emperor's voice. Were you loyal, you would have set down your weapons and accepted your guilt, but you sided with your brothers before your Emperor, as the Adeptus Astartes always have. Yeah, so right there, again, you see he is not going to accept anything else other than just complete obedience, and really has made up his mind before he even, like, to say to lay down your weapons and we'll get a fair trial. Like, that's not going to happen. Just lay down your weapons so it's easier to kill you all than what it is now. Although they make it seem like it takes nothing for these Custodes to just wipe them out. Like, they make it seem like they're killing guardsmen. But I don't know what this is all setting up for, essentially. But before we get into that, his comment about the gene seed. So to say that they have heretical gene seed just because they share gene seed with the Brazen Drakes is something I'm not sure how that is going to wash out in the end, or if this is just going to be a one-off and done short story and we're not going to get any more context or anything with it. Because an argument I've seen pop up is people are like, well, the Brazen Drakes gene seed is tainted, so therefore, like, they're heretics. But then it's like, there's not really, there's a connection, but there's not, like, because I mentioned, like, how is it then, if the Brazen Drakes gene seed is heretical, and by gene seed association the Gray Shield's gene seed is heretical, then that would mean the first founding chapter, the parent chapter that created them all, would be heretical. So the question is, who is the first founding chapter? Because if they all come from there, then that would mean that that chapter is heretical and needs to be everything. So just throwing it out there, but like, let's say the Brazen Drakes come from the Ultramarines. So that means every Ultramarine successor, to include the Ultramarines, are now heretical and must be destroyed. I mean, going by Custodes' logic, that is how it should work. It's not just the Brazen Drakes. And he says later on, what's her name? Decima says, what did we start here? She signed to Tyvar, because again, she's feeling guilt and conflicted, and she definitely sees that they're the ones that really kind of started in the end without doing like a proper investigation to see what happened. But of course, he says, we started nothing, he replied. And then later on, we started nothing, he repeated, but we will finish it. We will not rest until every Brazen Drake Space Marine, old or new, lies dead. Okay, cool, fine, whatever. You're going to kill all the Primaris and you're going to kill the chapter. But what about the first founding? Because the Brazen Drakes don't get like their own, they didn't have their own Primarch. They didn't start their own gene seed. They are a successor of somebody. And therefore, if their logic is the old and new Brazen Drakes are all heretical, then that means everybody of that gene seed is heretical. So I want to know who they come from. And I don't think it's a traitor gene seed at all, even though they say Call used all of the gene seeds, because they wouldn't have a successor chapter. The Brazen Drakes would not exist. Successor chapters come from the first founding loyalists. So any Primaris that have Traitor Gene Seed would most likely have became a an Ultima founding all Primaris chapter, not a successor. I mean, they'd be essentially like a successor chapter, but they would be all Primaris founding because they wouldn't have any like regular or the old style Marines to go and reinforce because they all turned traitor. So yeah, so that's kind of where my conflict is like I mean, how far are you going to take this then? I mean, in my eyes is the whole line from successors all the way through to the first founding need to be taken out then, if that's the logic you're going to use. Yeah, so I mean, that's kind of the gist of it there, and that's kind of my thoughts. Obviously, so myself, I definitely want to side more with the Space Marines from a more logical standpoint and place that makes sense. I definitely get the arguments, and I understand the arguments of like a lot of people kind of come out of the woodworks. There's definitely a bunch of different groups you have. Definitely like the groups that haven't liked the primary storyline because they see them as just too perfect and infallible, and they don't like that. And to a point, I still feel like they are because they still have not turned. You could say like in the rigid ideals of the Imperium, yes, they have because they basically fought back against the Custodi, who's supposed to be like the voice of the Emperor or whatever. So in that sense, in the strictest sense of the Imperium, where everyone's like, commissars have killed people for less and wiped out people down to a man, in the past for things. So this is no different. So yeah, I get that argument as well. But I think the biggest thing is like the arguments that we're having over this short story come from our current mindset. We don't live in like this super fascist Imperium where just such a strict obedience is expected and required. And so a lot of times people are more ready to side on the Space Marine side of things because he's talking more like a logical thought-thinking person of like our time. Like, well, I have no connection to him, and we don't know what's really going on. We need to figure that out. So give me the benefit of the doubt. And meanwhile, we have like this very narrow-minded individual who's like, no, you don't get any chances. You're a traitor just by existing, even though you've never met them and have no association and no history whatsoever with them. You're still a traitor just because you carry the same gene seed. It's essentially it's a like a racism thing, like 100%, because he doesn't like Adeptus Astartes already, and he's just so ready to throw them under the bus just because they share the same genetics, basically. It's to say like somebody doesn't like me as a person, so they hate every ancestor and everybody I've ever had in my family, that we're all the same, just because we share the same, genetic code and because we're related. The logic behind that makes no sense, but I mean, you see it like there's been throughout our own history of huge family feuds, like, was it the McCoys and the Hatfields, I think? It was like a big, like, rivalry in like Tennessee or something, or I don't know, something like that. I mean, then you have, you got Shakespeare, the Romeo and Juliet, the man, I can't even think of that. I can't think of their names. The Capulets and the Montagues. There you go. I don't. I can remember the Hatfields and the McCoys, but I can't remember Shakespeare. But yeah, so you kind of have like that kind of idea. Then of course, obviously we have the genocides and things that happen as well. And it's like it's kind of like it's kind of pointing at something like that. It's like, so it's guilty just by existence. And there's like this argument that seems to be like you have these people that are like, that's just stupid, whatever, and then other people are like, yeah, but that's 40K, that's grim dark, And it is. I mean, that is what it is, and that's what makes this story, I think, so uncomfortable for everybody that's a Primaris fan or even a Space Marine fan to some point, because Primaris are the answer, and we don't like to see, or have been the answer in the lore anyway. Um, we don't like to see um, like somebody think the contrary just because, for no reason. There's absolutely no reason, and they just think that just because that's just the way it is. And of course, like, as you know, basically that to say that, like, to think in the hobby in general, a lot of people very much get attached to a lot of their armies and stuff, and kind of take almost like personal offense to say, it's like, well, then you're saying that I'm a traitor too, like, where does it stop? And obviously the custodians, I think, honestly think all Space Marines are traitors at the end, are looking for any excuse, because like he stated, you've always sided with your brothers before the Emperor. They definitely blame, like the Horus Heresy and the perfect vision of the Emperor would have never happened if it wasn't for the Astartes. So there's a ton of animosity against them, and I feel like they're just waiting for any excuse and any chance to jump on it. So I think that's kind of what this was, is he was definitely looking to jump on the chance to just take out some Space Marines, for sure. Um, yeah. So what does that mean, though, going forward? Is this just a one-off story? Is this going to continue? A lot think that this is going to be kind of a precursor to a lead-in with some Trader Primaris or Trader Custodes. I don't think we'll see Trader Custodes. I'm not sure. I mean, people have been pointing out the fact that, like, you have the henchman with the new Fabius Bile model, like, pulling an organ out of a Primaris Marine. But then you also have on the new book that he's coming out in, is it the War of the Spider or the Spider, whatever it is, the one with him on the cover, there's like that artwork of him working on a fallen custody. Um, so the idea is he going to make his own version of custody, his own version of Primaris, or what? I don't think we'll see a Chaos Custodes or something. Um, if anything, I think we'll see some sort of version of Primaris. As much as I don't want there to be any kind of Chaos Primaris, I think this will end up seeing some kind of a Primaris Chaos. My hope, though, is it's some kind of like unit or something like that, like an obliterator looking, crazily morphed, experimented on Primaris, maybe like a Primaris Berserker or something. It comes in a unit of 3 or something. They're just like these, Berserker units that just run in and just have, like, I don't know, some craziness that happens. Like, he's like pumping all these chemicals into them and just makes them into like Bane or something, and they just go nuts. If they're gonna do something, I'd rather something like that. I don't want to see, like, Primaris Intercessors suddenly are now a thing for the Chaos, and they're just like porting them over that way. I would not be a big fan of that. I think it would be better if it was some sort of like a crazy weird experiment thing. Like I said, like a Bane-esque unit where they're getting like pumped full of chemicals and they're just like go nuts and just don't know what to do, kind of a thing, and they just go crazy. Um, yeah, if anything, that's what I would, if I had to pick, or if like I had to be like, it's happening, it's inevitable, but how would you do it, or how would you like to see it? That's what I would like to see. Um, but yeah, I guess we'll find out if what that means. Like I said, this could just be like a one-off story to try to explain, like why Imperial forces might be facing off against each other when you go and play somebody, because so many people play Imperium. It's just an idea of like how you could come up with like a narrative as to why these two forces are facing off against each other. Um, or it is a precursor into something. It is a teaser into some sort of new Chaos unit that's going to be based on Primaris or Custodes, potentially. Or maybe it's another way they're going with the story to start another civil war, where now we're going to have Custodes pitted against Primaris Marines, or just Marines in general, where either Custodes start to split away from the Imperium, or something else entirely. We don't know. I could. I don't know. I don't know if the Custodes would split from the Imperium, or I don't know how they would work if there was going to start like another civil war, like Custodes versus Primaris. Because I think initially a lot of people thought that maybe Primaris and regular Space Marines were going to start like another little civil war, but it seems slowly and through a lot of the books and lore, like there's been some apprehension against some Primaris joining chapters, and some Primaris having some apprehension from joining the chapters of like successor chapters, because a lot of them want to go back to like their parent first founding chapter. Um, but I think if there was to be another Civil War, this definitely sets it up a lot more for like a Custodes versus Primaris, or not. I keep saying Primaris, but Space Marines. Um, I just don't know how necessarily they would do that, because if the Custodes decided to like annex off Earth or Terra and the Emperor, um, and if that was kind of like where they started. I don't think they would break from the Imperium, because them saying things like they're the voice of the Emperor, like they see themselves as the true heirs to what the Emperor's vision is, and not the Space Marines. So I could maybe see that happening. Maybe they fall in and they start kind of like annexing off Terra in some way. Because before, Custodes were always seen as they're on the throne world. They're there to protect the Emperor, and that's what they've been. But then suddenly, what I don't remember if it was the Gathering Storm is when we finally started. When did the Custodes become an army on the table? I can't remember. It was excuse me. I think it was the Burning of Prospero box. They came in. It was a 30K box set. And then they started making rules for them for 40K, and then they started slowly making their way out onto the table for 40K. And I want to say that was probably, 2017? I think 2016, 2017, sometime in there. They started coming out. And now they've become like a full-fledged army and everything. And yeah, and then in the lore, you started seeing them. They weren't on the throne world. They were kind of making their way out more now that Gilliman came back. Yeah, so I don't know. That's where we're at. So we'll see. But yeah, I'm curious. What's your opinions? What are your thoughts on it? Where do you stand on this? Again, because I have an all Primaris founded army, and I'm definitely more of a Space Marine fan myself, I have a tendency to side with the Space Marine on this one. Although I see where the Custodes coming from, I also definitely see a very kind of narrow-minded view of things. So it's kind of torn, because I get the idea of this rigid structure, just you do what you're told kind of thing, and I get like that's the way the Imperium works, and that a Space Marine would probably be no different when dealing with like a regular human who's back talking and not listening. So I see the difference here, but it also just frustrating, because I'm just such a Space Marine fan myself, to see that and to think that they see these Gray Shields who have zero association with this chapter, and we don't even know, like, what I would like to know is who the parent chapter is, like who is the first founding chapter that they all come from, and then I would like to see what the answer is from there. So but yeah, I better stop, because I could just rant on in circles about this forever, it seems, just like the internet is doing right now as well. So thanks for watching. If you haven't already, please check out the Facebook page. I'll have that in the link below. And then also, if you haven't, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel, as I'll continue making more reviews, videos, thoughts, things hobby related. I've got tips and tricks on the hobby, on the workbench, and I do more book reviews through this. And yeah, so appreciate you for watching, and until next time.